We are on to the macromolecules. The macromolecules are a category of what you might think of as food. You don't really think of nucleic acids as being food, but they are found in food. They're found in meat, alcohol, some of the things that you do consume. But you've heard of these before. These are the carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. You have to know a little bit about each category. Be able to identify some of the traits of each category, and I'm going to go through that with you right now, pretty quickly. But here are some characteristics of the macromolecules. They do contain carbon and hydrogen, so they at least contain that. They contain other things as well, but that makes them organic molecules. They dissolve in water. It says organic lipids, and then it gives you the four categories here: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. So under the carbs, throughout my lifetime, these have become the things that you don't eat if you want to lose weight. But here are some of the characteristics of carbohydrates. They provide energy to cells, supply materials to build cells, water soluble, contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And the ratio is, you see it's 2 to 1, and here's glucose, C6H12O6, contain twice the amount of hydrogen. And then here are some examples. So I'm going to go back. Yeah, it says they are a large category. So here's what I just went through with you. Carbohydrates, there's the ratio 1:2 to 1. Here's some examples: sugar, starches. If you don't know what a starch is, and we're going to do this at the end, that's food categories: potatoes, pasta, bread. Corn is considered a starch. A lot of different categories, things like that. Complex carbohydrates. Their primary thing is they're an energy source. They are the primary energy source. Neurons and muscle in your body, they use glucose, which is a monosaccharide, as a primary energy source. And the diets nowadays that you abstain from carbs, like the ketogenic diet, where your body actually makes ketones in response to not having enough carbs, that's a whole nother subject for another day. But here are the categories. So you have to be able to know an example of a monosaccharide. A monosaccharide is a simple sugar, and I'll show you that in a second. This information is in your PowerPoint, but I'm going to go ahead and just type these in. Here's the main one. So glucose, probably the main monosaccharide. This is the primary energy source for muscles, glands, and neurons, organs in general. Fructose is one that's found in fruit. You have another one you probably haven't heard about, galactose, which is the same ratio as glucose, just put together a little bit differently. And then you have too much caffeine, deoxyribose, and then the other monosaccharide is ribose. These two are called pentose sugars. That means they have 5 carbon atoms. These two are made, they are used to make the nucleic acid, genetic material, DNA and RNA. DNA has deoxyribose, RNA has ribose. So these are all monosaccharides, very simple sugars, and I'll show you that example in a second. Disaccharides. It's 2 monosaccharides joined together to form a disaccharide. So these are ones you've heard of. They're still considered to be a sugar. Sucrose, maltose is another one that's very common. And then lactose. Lactose is a milk sugar. Probably table sugar, malt sugar, milk sugar. A disaccharide means there's 2 monosaccharides joined together by a bond. The things we talked about earlier. And then the polysaccharides, complex carbohydrates, starches, which is like food, like I said, bread, pasta, corn, things like that. And I'll just give you some examples here. Okay, yeah, starch is a polysaccharide. Glycogen, which is how the muscles store glucose. Glycogen are these big long chains of simple sugars that are all joined together. Glucose units all joined together. Another one you see here is cellulose. Cellulose is part of plant cell walls. That's why they're crispy. We actually can't break down cellulose. The microbes in our digestive tract do that for us. And that's why it's good for you. It increases gastric motility, keeps everything moving at a good rate. And then down here, and I'm going to stay with this. I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bigger. There we go. So here's a monosaccharide. Here's a disaccharide. Here is a polysaccharide. See all the units that are connected together. So it goes all the way over here. Poly means many. But this is a simple sugar. This is a double sugar or a disaccharide. Di means two. And this is a polysaccharide. And that little oxygen, they're held together by a process, but these are bonds that hold this together. If your muscles are storing glycogen, they store it like this. And then if you need it, they break these little bonds off and then put that into the bloodstream. Same thing the other way. There's a hormone called insulin that regulates blood glucose. It makes cells that have the receptor bring glucose into the cell and make these big long chains like this, and then it drops the glucose in the blood. So those are carbohydrates. And like I said, they are a primary energy source. That's one of their main, if not their main function. They do other things, but that's their main function. So I'm going to go down here to lipids. These are bigger. Lipids are big molecules. They're kind of like diesel fuel. It takes your body a little longer to break these down, so they're not considered a primary energy source, but they are a long-term energy source. When you're going at a low limit, what's called the aerobic pathway, daily living activities, low intensity exercise, you primarily use these as an energy source. These cannot provide energy for anything such as sprinting, running, weightlifting, because they take too long to be broken down. Okay, a saturated fat, which is what this is. Now, down here, this is called a triglyceride. So I'll go back up there in a minute. Here's the glycerol, and then here are the three fatty acids. And this one's an unsaturated fat. These two are saturated fats. A saturated fat is completely saturated with hydrogen. All these little this carbon backbone is covered in hydrogen. And yes, they are straight. And saturated fats, they are mostly solid at room temperature. There are some that are liquid, like coconut oil, but they're mostly solid. So they are completely saturated with hydrogen. And like I said, they're mostly solid, animal fat, that kind of thing. Those are saturated fats. The unsaturated fats, which are considered to be healthy, extra virgin olive oil, next time if you buy that kind of thing, they are loaded with mono and polyunsaturated fats. Avocados are too. But these are not completely saturated with hydrogen. Okay, and then down here, a triglyceride is this glycerol and 3 fatty acids. And that's what, if you go to the doctor and get that checked, that's what they're checking. Your triglycerides, and they usually check something called the HDL, the LDL, and your cholesterol. So, and total cholesterol. Okay, so big energy source. Fats are a huge energy source. Let me go down to, well, here is, okay, so here's a polysaccharide. I showed you these. There's a triglyceride, a saturated fat, and an unsaturated fat. And a triglyceride again. This slide here is showing, this is called a phospholipid, which we're going to cover these later. They're part of cell membranes, and they have a little phosphate and two little fatty acid tails. And they're very specific. See, the head is water soluble, so it's hydrophilic, and the tails are insoluble, which means they're hydrophobic, and that allows it to be a selectively permeable membrane. So we'll deal with these later. For right now, know what a triglyceride is, a glycerol, and 3 fatty acids, and they can be any combination of the fatty acids. It doesn't have to just be 2 saturated fats to 1. An unsaturated fat, and then a saturated fat. Now, these are proteins. They are a pretty complex category, so we're just going to barely talk about these. You need to know what makes up a protein, which are amino acids. They do make up enzymes, hormones, parts of cells. They're very important. The biggest category of macronutrients or macromolecules. They are also an energy source. You need those to build and repair cells and muscle and things like that. You need to know the 4 levels of organization. In other words, know a description for each one of these. A protein starts out looking like this, something very simple. In fact, I'm going to make these big. There we go. So here is the primary structure, and see each of those is an amino acid held together by what are called peptide bonds. And we kind of talked about this on a pH scale. If blood gets too acidic, it'll break these bonds up. If it gets too basic, it'll do the same thing. But this is called the primary structure of a protein. And it's this long chain. It looks like a string of beads. That's what it looks like. Here is the secondary structure. You have the pleated sheet look. See, the little red dots represent the bonding. Same thing here. This is what hair is supposed to look like under a microscope. And if you put heat to hair, it goes a certain way. It's because you're breaking these little bonds, and eventually they'll go back and reform again. So this is the secondary structure, either a pleated sheet or this little twisted helix. This is called the tertiary structure. I don't think I have. I think I have these same things. Yes, right there. See these little sections. This has folds, or what are called conformations. And I can make this a little bigger. Anyway, it's starting to get a very specific shape. In proteins, their shape determines their function. And the last one says quaternary. It's 2 or more polypeptide chains. It is a string of beads, but when you start getting really long, they're called polypeptides, kind of like a polysaccharide with the carbohydrates. Long chains of these are called polypeptides. If you only had 2, it's a dipeptide. You even have ones called oligopeptides, which are like 6 or 7. But this is the quaternary, and you can see it's 2 or more of those long chains that are all bound together. And now these are fully functioning proteins like hemoglobin, myoglobin, stuff in your body. So that's the 4 levels of proteins. Be able to pick out these, be able to look at that and go, okay, what is this? What level of protein is this one? Or even a description. This is one long polypeptide chain. So is this one. So is this one. And then the one at the end, the quaternary, is 2 or more long polypeptide chains. Let me see if I can. There we go. Yes. Well, we're almost to the end of this, but so there they are. And let me check here. Yeah, here we go. Here's some examples of proteins. There's each one. Now that's some small writing. I apologize, but we're on to the last category. So nucleic acids. This is what you would find. This is genetic material. Something else we're going to talk about. So this is a strand of DNA. These little letters represent what are called the base pairs. And I see we have 3 things here. So you have I'll put these in, and then I should have these listed here. Well, here's DNA and RNA. Let me click back over here. Sorry to be jumping back and forth. This is called a nucleotide. It's a phosphate, a sugar, and a nitrogenous base. So a nucleotide is made of a phosphate, a pentose sugar, and a nitrogenous base, which is what these are. And in DNA, when they link up, that's what the genetic code is. So a nucleic acid, they're made of nucleotides, which is what, this is a diagram for one right there. See, it's got a phosphate, a sugar, and a nitrogenous base. Here are the, so DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and then you have RNA, ribonucleic acid. Here is an example of DNA. DNA is double-stranded. See these are hydrogen bonds that hold it together. This is RNA, ribonucleic acid. It is single-stranded. So as far as some differences between the two of these, DNA, double-stranded. The base pairs are adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. Cannot type. That's all 4 base pairs for DNA. And it does have deoxyribose as the sugar that kind of holds it all together, but it's double-stranded. RNA is single-stranded. Yeah, it only has, RNA is something that a cell makes. DNA is actually part of the cell nucleus. It's something that's passed on from other generations. RNA, the base pairs are adenine, guanine, without me trying to type that out again, cytosine, and what's called uracil. So cells make RNA, and apparently thymine costs a lot metabolically to make. So in its place, your body makes uracil, the off-brand nitrogenous base. So that is also a difference with DNA. And, well, I'm going to put this here, but ribose is the sugar. And like I said, the biggest thing probably is that, well, their DNA is double-stranded, RNA is single-stranded. So see the nucleotides, how they're stacked on top of themselves. And I think here, yeah, and this is a little bit too big. Let me make this a little smaller. So in your outline, so here is DNA, here's RNA, and you can see how they're joined together. But normal base pairing, T's always bind with A's and vice versa. C's always bind with G's and vice versa. So see, here's an A bonding to a T, adenine to thymine, guanine to cytosine. There are times when a cell, when the DNA splits and it makes a copy of itself, and it also makes a section of this RNA. So everywhere on RNA that you would have a thymine, like for instance here, if you were building RNA on this side, you'd have a uracil in place of a thymine. Because your body actually synthesizes or makes RNA. Okay, I hope I didn't go too quickly, but I did give you some more information, and if you don't mind, look at that video I made on our lessons. All right, and that's all with the macromolecules.